Today I'm promising you a new perspective. Unless perhaps you're Norwegian, I'm guessing today's episode will be full of new insights for you, but we're not going to do a cultural or historical podcast. That's not our purpose, but one on leadership, as you know. So you will leave here with new ideas on performance and results coming from a new perspective. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be with us live for future episodes on your favorite social media channel. And the way to do that is to find out when they're going to happen. And the way to do that is to join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, take your pick. And from there, you will know when everything is happening so you can join us. Here's how to do that. If you want to do that on Facebook, just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook to sign up. Or if you want to do that on LinkedIn, just go to remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. That's where we share information about upcoming episodes, give you other insights, and sometimes give you special bonuses just for being a member. Today's episode is brought to you by the second edition of our new book, The Long Distance Leader, Revised Rules for Remarkable Remote and Hybrid Leadership. If you lead a team that is distributed in any way, this book will give you new skills, new insights, and the confidence to lead more effectively in this new world of work. Learn more and order your copy at remarkablepodcast.com/LDL for Long Distance Leader. And with that, let me bring in my guest. There he is. You can see his smiling face as I introduce him. His name is Anders Indset. He is known as the business philosopher. He is a Norwegian-born writer, deep tech investor, and former elite athlete. He is a fifth-time Spiegel best-selling author of 6 international books, and has been recognized by Thinkers 50 as one of the influential thinkers in the fields of technology and leadership in the years to come. He is a trusted sparring partner and advisor for global leaders and top executives, founder of the Norges Group, Global Institute of Leadership and Technology, and the Quantum Economy Alliance. His latest book is The Viking Code, The Art and Science of Norwegian Success, which we'll be exploring today. Anders, welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.
Kevin, thank you for having me.
Joining us from Germany. Well, you're from Germany, or you live in Germany. That's where you are today, I assume.
Yes, I live in Germany. I've been living in Germany for 25 years, but I'm a born Norwegian, so 98.5% Scandinavian to be.
98.5%. And everybody, I'm saying his name as Anders, and he was very gracious to me when we were before we started and said, well, that's how you say it in English. So I guess I'm okay, but if he says German, Norwegian, he lets me say it in a way that works for English speakers. So thanks for being here. When I got your book and was pitched your book, I saw the Viking Code. I thought, well, this is different. This is interesting. And it is. And I'd like us to start. I often ask, Anders, people to tell us about your journey. But really what I'd like you to do is tell us a little bit about the journey and the book, because they're interconnected, because it feels like this is a book you were born to write. So tell us a little bit about your journey in short and how it connects to this book.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I mean, I'm very glad that you saw that. It was a book that came very natural to me. I was writing a book about capitalism and the outlooks of the economy, and all of a sudden I noticed that my countrymen, the Norwegians, were winning medals in all kinds of sports that had nothing to do with snow.
I was going to say, not just skiing.
I was like, yeah, this is, and my country, to be fair, I mean, it's not a country that value high performance. So I was very curious how that came to be. We noticed Jens Stoltenberg running the NATO and negotiating complex geopolitical issues. We have leaders like the CEO of the Norwegian Pension Fund, Nicolai Tangen, who runs a great podcast. And all of a sudden you had this flair of a kind of sort of modern Viking vibe on performance. And I was very curious about that. So I called a good friend of mine, a coach with a training center of the Olympics. And I asked him, how do these athletes perform at that level? Is there like a magic code or recipe? And I started to dig into that, and having a sport background myself, I was curious about like the new recipes for sports, because I fancy a lot of sports. But When I started to think about this, I noticed that the interesting topic was not that they were the best at their game, at their finite game of winning, but they were also the most liked. They were very popular. They practiced team and fair play, and that to me was a very nice, interesting narrative, because it might seem as a contradiction that collectivism can serve individualism. So that to me was the basic idea that also serves into the philosophy. So in the first part of the book, as you have seen, it's very autobiographic. It's kind of sort of my journey to growing up and going through the various athletes and the phenomena. And in the second part of the book, we get deeper into the philosophy of a life of Lebendigkeit, as we would say in German, the vitality of life, the active way of living. And we'll look at how the Viking Code can be applied to business and politics and education. So the book is, as you've seen, broader than talking about the topic of high performance. It's a life philosophy for progress. And I actually think that human beings were born to create and come up with better explanation. Progress is a very fundamental thing of our lives. And that's why, to me, this book was very important, because we live in a time, as you know, of a lot of reactive performance and active, and that wears you out. Whereas if you can have an intrinsic motivation to perform, to act, to take action, we can do a lot of stuff. So that was the motivation, and also how this came very natural to me to write this book.
And so that's interesting because, I would say that the first part of the book is really very much about performance. But I would say the whole book is more about success. And of course, success is the word in the subtitle. So let's start there. How do you, Anders, define success?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great follow-up question, because again, I can speak from a subjective experience. So I was a professional athlete. I built my companies, and from an external perspective, many people would say, you are successful. They would admire things that I would have achieved, I would assume, and I was, doing well in a definition of traditional KPIs of success.
Right.
But I didn't feel successful. So today, when we talk, I feel really successful. For me, it's a subjective experience, because today I define success as progress. I am privileged to get up in the morning every single day, and I get to learn. I get to evolve and develop myself through new skills and practices and tools. And that is the definition in this book. It's not about, a book where you can define based on materialism. So whereas the Olympic gold medals and winning the world championship is something that is, that you should celebrate. I mean, we need goals and visions. The actual magic is not in the finite definition of the goal, but the infinite path of progress. So that is an essential learning that these individuals and these athletes that serve into the community and the collectivism, they look for everyday progress. I write about microambitions in the book. And that is, to me, a philosophy that takes you into the Lebendigkeit, in an active life, because you get to experience the magic of your own experience. So you are not a philosophical zombie reacting to tasks and things taken from the outside of likes and shares and Ferraris and yachts, but you are actually a human being in a collective environment where you get to shape your own path and experience progress. So that, to me, is how I would define success, of filling your life in order to have a fulfilled life, coming from an internal path.
Yeah, I want to come back to micro ambitions a little bit more, but I want to highlight for all of you who are watching or listening something that Anders said when I first said, how do you define success? He said, I get to learn, I get to evolve. And I want to highlight the word get. Like, I don't have to, I get to. It's a choice that you've made. It's a way of thinking about life to create that active, vibrant life. And using that word get, I think, says a lot. I mean, I'm not surprised, because I've read most of the book, but it's not where everyone starts. Anything you want to say about that specifically?
Yeah, very a good point. First of all, and I think that I get to, but it is also a path of how do you learn to experience that? We are in a very reactive society. So we have been on a path of progress as a humanity, as a species, for the past 50 years. We have maximized the art of being right. It's like your opinion, my opinion. It's a very, very binary way of thinking. And if we put that on steroids, adding AI and technology to it, we become, the servant of this progress. And that can be very exhausting. That is why we have to take off and retreats, because we don't experience life. We don't experience Lebendigkeit. We don't experience that we get to achieve. If you play the piano, you have that song that you have been practicing and mastering, you experience the slight progress of your everyday achievement. That's like the compound interest of everything in life. And that compounds into what we could see from an external perspective to be called success. But the journey, the micro steps that you take, if you learn how to experience that, then you have an intrinsic motivation to get up and write that piece, to write that first sentence, to go to the gym, to do the things that you fancy and like. And you have a very, I would say, a way of shaping your own reality. And that is, you can talk about consciousness and being present and all that, but it's very simple that I get to, yes, but also it's a part where you seek out your own, ordinary experiences.
And value those in being present in them, as you said. I want to spend some time, because I sort of hinted at it in the open, and after all, we're talking about a book called The Viking Code. So I want to sort of let you take us into the Norwegian culture a little bit, and I'm going to use two things to do that. Two things you talk about in the book, and I'm going to put it on the screen. I'm going to let you say it so you can say it in Norwegian. But you open with this law, this series of things, and it opens up. I've never seen in a book where something is laid out and it's all crossed out right in the beginning. Every line is crossed out. So
Yeah.
it's the law of
Jante. It's
Jante.
Jante.
See, I would have messed that up.
Yeah.
So what is it in brief? Because we could take the rest of our conversation just on it. But what is it in brief? And then why is it important how do we take that and use that, even if we're not Norwegian?
Yeah, sure. Now, I mean, the start of the book, the publisher came back and said, do the readers get that this is not an error, right? and I said, well, that's what I'm
I
saying.
got it. I'm one reader. I got it.
So I grew up with the Janteloven, with the law of Jante. And there are multiple cultural similar phenomena. Basically, in short, it is we should not, stand out. We should all be equal. So you cut the flowers down to the same size. You keep people at a grounded level, because the groundedness of the value system of the collective stands above, rising out above the others. And that's the ethos of the Norwegian culture. And it has, to me, been a hindrance for very many talents that have not believed in themselves. And I'm not talking about that self-belief where you kind of sort of dominate and you do everything to move ahead, but it's just to believe in your own skills in order to have self-trust, to go out in the world and explore and to build relationships. So Axel Sandemose, an author, wrote this about 100 years ago, and it has been a very, very fundamental a part of the communication media, and everyone in Norway can refer to this. So, Janteloven was in his way or her way, right? Because they did something that was not seen as, collective. It was, it was even to be a very individualistic type. So if you look at a game of soccer, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, the world-class soccer player, he was from Sweden, but he would not have come from Norway because he was eccentric, he was extravagant, he had all these facets. And the Norwegian was supposed to be polite and all of that. And in the beginning of 2000, we had some athletes and some players, amongst them the world leading chess player Magnus Carlsen, who was a bit different. He came out it with 12, I'm going to be the world champion, and he went he didn't confront the value system, but it felt different. And there
So
was
let's
a
just, I'm going to stop you just for 1 second, because for many people who are listening, I mean, our podcast data would, demographics would say that the largest single group of people listening are in the United States. And if we heard a story that started out at age 12, I'm going to be the world's best, and then they eventually became that, we would say, yeah, that seems pretty darn normal. Not so normal in Norway.
yeah, no, it wasn't. Now it is. But there were some years where you had world class performers that also had some, difficulties with team play and media, and the generation that came after that seemed to have somewhat overcome this law of Jante, because today we have very self-confident, strong, very often young male individuals. A lot of these players in sports are young men, and they're very tied to their fathers as mentors. They have a very solid foundation. Even if they break through and become world class athletes, paid hundreds or millions, they are still in a long-term relationship with their high school girlfriend, and they have that coming back to the town where they grew up, and so they stand on the shoulders of giants of this cultural ethos, but still they have managed to rise above and have that individualistic self-trust to say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to not, conquer and rape and kill like the old Vikings. But we are modern Vikings. We're going to take the collectivism, spread joy, spread team play, but I'm going to become the world's best at what I do. And that is the phenomena that, and I must point this out, Kevin, that even the Norwegian themselves are not aware of this success factor. I see today that Norwegian are looking for the next level, and they are starting to learn look for these expertise models of specialization. But this is not the time that we live in. We live in a time of an era of generalists. We live in a time where things change very rapidly. So you need to be able to adapt and to work together. So from the American Declaration of Independence, we today have kind of sort of like a declaration of interdependence, where we commit to the collective in order to grow ourselves. So I think that is, the essence of overcoming the law of Jante has been very important for the rise of many talents from coming out of Norway.
So I guess we're 2/3 of the way through our conversation, and I haven't had you tell me what the Viking Code actually is. You've been talking about parts of what's inside of it, but how would you define the Viking Code?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it would work to me just as well without the Vikings and Norway as a country, because I think this
Yeah,
is
but it makes a good hook for the book, right?
no, I think because it's very authentic, because it's actually a telling of something that is there. But I think it serves also very well for a global ethos and philosophy for a lebendig or an active, vital life, and we need that today, I think. So the Viking Code has a lot of tangible concrete things that you can do. Which I talk about various, aspects of how this came to be. But to me, it is a life philosophy. So it serves leaders in every section of society. I think it's a very good guidance to lead your life and also to influence others, because this is what they have all done. The people that I mentioned, be it in sport, education, politics, or in society in general. It's a philosophy for leaders of change, for leaders of progress, of positive progress for humanity. So I think it's a philosophical touch to it that could serve as a Viking way of living for a better society, for a society of active human beings that understands that we are a part of a collective, and they also have their own journey, so they do not get sucked into the whole technological tsunami of reactionism. So yeah, I think that is the essence of the Viking Code to me. It's a philosophy, a way of living, to serve as a leader of change, if you like.
So one of the things that you mentioned earlier, as a part of that way of living, and I wanted you to go into a little bit more, is the idea of um, the micro ambition. So you hinted at it, you mentioned the phrase, but tell us more about what a micro ambition is and how we can use those to live this more active, vital life.
Yeah, I mean, we are in a world where we do a lot of tasks, a lot of things that we are doing are reaction to impulses. I mean, even our media consumption today is not we a free choice of reflected thoughts. It's if you go to YouTube, it used to be, this could interest you, take your decision, you individual you, but now it just say next video, right? So yeah, yeah. And that is, the dopamine and how we have learned to communicate through social media with thumbs up and thumbs down, the instant reaction and gratification. It just serves our dopamine systems and the serotonin and the whole shabam. And I think that coming back to having achievable small goals and having a task that you set out, this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to let go of. We never had more time today, but we have packed our life with a lot of things. So you can't make yourself happy or successful like just overnight, and you can probably never make yourself happy, but you can make yourself less unhappy. So a micro ambition could just as well be to let go of something. Just write down one or two or three things that is sucking energy or holding you back. And if you take that and you chop that off small slices at a time, you put yourself in a position where you can be struck by something called happiness, where you put yourself in a position to experience the ordinary wonders of life, to experience that light progress that you might have on your journey to mastery. And this is just becoming conscious about those small steps. It could be to say, I'm thinking about writing a book versus I'm going to write 30 minutes every morning between 6 and 6:30. You show up, you're there, you're micro ambitious, and some days you're good, some days you're not good, and you just continue with that. And you experience all those micro things that you do in those 30 minutes. And most people, by having that simple micro ambition, would have more liveliness and vitality and connectedness to the ordinary life as most people have today, because we are just dragged through life, worn out. We have become in a new kind of sort of existentialist philosophical state that I call undead. The lights are on, but there are no one home to perceive them. So this is a way of like taking control and moving that back into life, and continued over time. The outcome of the process will be the goal and the recognition and the celebration. But the actual journey, and this is also very Eastern philosophical in the way of thinking, is actually the journey is where the magic lies, the experience of the small steps. So this is the essence of micro ambitions.
If we define, or when we define success as progress, the micro ambition is the way to get there, because we're making small movements in the direction of that progress and living in the moment. Being intentional is the word that I would use to talk about that. There's something else in the book. I mean, there's lots in the book. Obviously, we can't get to all of it, of course. But there's something else in the book that I don't even know if any of the other folks that you've talked to about it have even mentioned. But it's one of the things that I love, because I think we're of common mind on this, and that is the role of play in high performance. That I actually have made T-shirts years ago that said "Make Work Play," and so talk to us a little bit about the role of play in creating high performance.
Yeah. Let me start by saying there are multiple ways. I mean, the command and control in a disciplined way, in elite academies of historical, heights of Eastern training methodologies, they kind of sort of worked in their way. You suffered for 10 years and you stand at the top of the pinnacle and you got your Olympic gold medal and you cry and you say, I've been doing what I love and my whole life, and that's of course a lie. You suffered along the way. So but that's that it wipes out a lot of that. I think in general, not taking everything so serious, letting go is very important, but to have fun, to enjoy the wonders of life. Our life is a most likely a wonderful journey to nowhere. And we are in a society, we are amusing ourselves to death by consumption of stupid media things that are driving us every day, and we're not even having fun. It just wears us out, right? Yes, exactly. So we are the paradox of that is that we're not enjoying it. We're getting more depressed of what even though we are consuming entertainment, and that's a weird thing, right? So I think the play in Norway, parents say, put on your clothes, get out and play, and we have started to control and regulate and measure everything. Children want to play on cemeteries or in the forest, and they don't have to have all secured playgrounds that are put into boxes and define the roles where and how to play, right? So the freedom to play and the activation of laughter and enjoyment, I think that's a power source for performance. And I
Not
think
just for kids.
yeah, and I think if we stop playing, we kind of sort of risk growing up. Everything becomes like put into a finitude of structures and things. I mean, I'm not saying structure and having like management and stability and using more technology to be stable. It's very important in organizations. Many underestimate that, but I see that in the management part. So management to me is not something that people do. It's something for technology and leadership. And that's why I like the Remarkable Leadership podcast. I think just the essence of leadership together with trust or building a culture are the most essential things today more than ever, where a lot of people have moved into Zoom and zombie sessions and home offices and what have we not. So I think that is leadership and culture are the things that are needed the most in business today. And that requires also some joy and fun and playfulness, I think.
I would agree with you. And I'm going to ask you a question that I ask nearly all of my guests. I've never, ever had a better lead in to this question than what we've just been talking about. The question is, what do you do for fun? I mean, other than just live an active, vital life, what specific things do you do, Anders, for fun?
I mean, I get enjoyment from writing. To me, writing is thinking, and there's nothing more fulfilling to defining path and ideas. I've always loved that. I play the piano. I like, to do sports, but the magic and the fun is, with your children to get down on knees and get on eye level and just observe consciousness in its evolution, children that are growing up, and you just get a lot of power from that, and it just gives you a lot of laughter and joy, and so I think that if I would say I'm going to seek a fun, enjoyable moment, I just spend time with my daughters, because I know it's just going to be a hell of a ride, and it's going to be the little one is going to say things that's just going to crack me up. And so I think in living, being like very privileged to live that a life that I do, and get to do a lot of things that I enjoy. If I'm going to seek up fun, I would just go out and play with my kids.
I love that. And for those of you that are only listening to this, to see the smile on his face when he's saying that tells the entire story. So we talked about writing. Let's talk about reading. What is something you've read recently, or maybe something else you would love to share with us that you've read?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been playing a lot lately because of the advancement of artificial intelligence, moving into singularity. That as I'm invested in quantum tech, and I'm very curious about like the end game of that. So I went back to learn about the evolution of humanity, and I just came back from Göbekli Tepe, east part of Turkey. It's one of the wonders of life. One of the findings that takes us back 12,000 years in history. It's twice as old as Stonehenge, and it's just amazing. No one knows what it is, what it was, and all that. So I'm very interested in mythology, because I think it's become very hard to come up with fictional ideas about the future, because it's so fast, and everything you can imagine is already there. It can be done through technology. So what would happen if mythology and enlightenment kind of sort of merged, right? What would be a society, foreseeable society then? And that I've been reading a lot of mythology, and I like a lot about Stephen Fry on his ethos of the whole structure of the Greek methodology. So I was just reading Troy, his book about the mythos, and I like that, to dig into history. So lately I've been playing a lot with that, having spent some wonderful days down in suddenly Urfa and digging into the cradle of humanity. So that's, I would say, it's one of the things that I'm playing with at the moment.
Perfect. Love that. Um, Probably the thing you wanted me to ask most is, where can we learn more about your work? Where do you want to point people in relationship to the book? Anything you want to tell us about connecting with you, finding you, those sorts of things.
Sure. No, I mean, go get the Viking Code. I would love feedback on the book. It's out. It's on Amazon, all the online stores, Barnes and Nobles, whatever, everyone where books can be bought. Most of my sources are found at andersindset.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter. We are planning a YouTube channel for more content in near future, and we are uploading a lot of articles and papers that have been published. Also around the thinking for people that are curious about my investment. You mentioned Njordis. The Njordis Group is a small advisory and investment boutique in Norway that we do participations and rounds of investment with tech startups. That's something that I have started to enjoy a lot and do a lot more these days. But at andersindset.com, you can find the sources, and the Viking Code is also found on viking-code.com or on all the normal bookstores, as you know. And I'm on LinkedIn if you want to link up there, of course.
Perfect. So thank you for that. And thank you for our stimulating conversation. And now it's not just about conversation, everybody. Now the question that I ask you every single week, every single episode, now what? What action are you going to take as a result of this conversation? Because as interesting, as thought-provoking, as insightful as this conversation might have been, if you don't take action, what was the point? So my challenge to you is to think back through the things that you either mentally highlighted or that you wrote down as you were listening, and saying, what action am I going to take as a result? What will I do now? And hopefully one of those things is to order a copy of the book. But beyond that, what specific ideas? Maybe there's an insight that you got about microambitions that you want to now go do something about. Maybe it could be any number of things. I don't want to, presume to you what it would be. What I want to do is challenge you to make sure that you ask that question. What will I do now as a result of what I learned? Anders, thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. And I've been looking forward to this conversation. Now we've had it, and I'm glad we did.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin.
And so everybody, if you enjoyed this episode, let someone know they should come listen. Wherever you're watching and listening to your podcast, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any future episodes. Give us a like, give us a comment. You know how to do all those things. But most of all, come back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.